HR doesn't have to wait for IT to create a ticket anymore. They can simply update their system, and then everything syncs up, and IT is then just able to monitor from a distance. So taking advantage of automation and really looking at that data and focusing on continuous improvement is going to make your service desk go from good to, fantastic.
The service desk is the face of IT. It's the entry point to get help and access IT services, and yet it's often stuck in firefighting mode, with technicians struggling to stay afloat. To help the service desk excel, first-line staff must have the processes, knowledge, and tools to resolve problems quickly and preferably on first contact. Joining us to dive a bit deeper into standardizing the service desk is Scott Houle, Principal Advisory Director here at Infotech. Scott, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks, Jeff. Glad to be here.
Awesome. So Scott, maybe right out the bat, what's kind of the state of the nation for the service desk? You don't hear as much about service desk as you may have, 5 or 10 years ago, with more of an emphasis on exponential technology. Is service desk a solved problem, or is this still very much top of mind for a number of IT departments?
I think for a lot of IT departments, it is still top of mind. When you look at how you build out your service delivery within the IT department, the service desk is really foundational. And it is the root for incident and problem management, as well as it leads into things like change control and much more. Without the service desk as your central focal point, your intake processes, a basic catalog, the operational metrics you're either to gather from it, you really struggle to do anything else. And users, when they're thinking about the service desk, they really expect a modern, streamlined customer experience. And they want to have different ways they can get to IT for help, whether they be talking to a person or from some kind of automated chatbot or even a good old-fashioned knowledge base. And in order to make the business case for new tools and staff, or to start automating certain user requests, IT leaders need to establish the ground rules of how the service desk operates, build a set of robust processes that will allow for continuous improvement via reliable analysis of the service desk ticket data.
Scott, modern users have, maybe more modern expectations about how they're able to interact with the service desk. What does that look like, and what does IT need to do to, meet those changing needs?
So with a lot of users, a lot of things haven't really changed over time. We still have a lot of users who still expect to be able to walk up and do a phone call. And that's one way people are going about accessing the service desk, the same way they always have. But we're seeing a subset of users who are finding it's easier just to go and use self-service tools, which is something that we're really starting to see and embrace. We're starting to see technology such as chatbots be that initial point of contact and direct the users to the right information to help resolve their issues. Or potentially they're able to do self-service so that they don't have to talk to the IT team at all. Sometimes the best ticket is the one that the IT team never really sees because the users have been able to resolve it themselves. And all of these things lead to a faster resolution time for the user, which in the end leads to higher customer satisfaction.
Right. So it sounds like there's some clear benefits to taking this more modern approach. As you mentioned, higher satisfaction, faster resolution times. What are you seeing around organizations getting wrong about service desk today?
Well, one of the things that's really surprising is a lot of organizations haven't come to this realization yet. They see the service desk as a place to dump tickets, and people just pick up what they need to do. And there sometimes still isn't really a ton of structure around the service desk. And that's where something like Standardize the Service Desk can come in and help. It helps you figure out what's important to you. How quickly can you react to the customers? Which level of service do you want to create, and how do you make that consistent across the board? The other things you can do with this is it gets you good information so that beyond the service desk, you're able to provide insights into what your customers are doing. And then from there, you're able to improve your services overall throughout the organization. So a lot of people could still benefit from taking a more structured approach to building out their service operations.
Right. So with that, Scott, let's maybe jump into some of the key insights that have come out of this research and this content. The first one we talk about is all about having a data-driven strategy when it comes to the service desk. What does that mean, and what role, if any, does data play as we standardize our approach here?
Data is really what you start with. It's how good your data is going to determine what level of trust people are going to have with the information that you're able to output that they can use to make their lives easier within the organization as a whole. Like with anything else, it's garbage in, garbage out. If technicians aren't following a standard process, if they're not taking their time and adhering to quality when they complete those tickets, you're not going to be able to use any of that data and reap any of the benefits coming out of that after the fact. So getting everything right and making sure everything's standardized and consistent in the service desk is critical. In my old roles prior to Infotech, I spent a lot of time looking at the data within the service desk, looking for key trends and opportunities. I would look for, are we having issues with running out of toner in a remote office, and seeing if there was better ways we could stop that so that users don't have downtime. I would look for knowledge base articles that we could use to deliver those to people so that they don't have to talk to IT. If they have an issue at 10 o'clock at night, they can just look up the knowledge base. And with all of that, you can look at trends, even scheduling. When are your busy times of the day? So you can schedule when technicians can take meetings or not take meetings when they're working on projects. Looking at the information that you've gathered in the service desk is going to give you a lot more ability to react to and be nimble and agile with your users and provide a better experience.
Scott, one of our insights here is that as we look to, improve the functioning of the service desk, there's a really key role for specialists here rather than just kind of the first line generalists. What does that mean and what does that look like in practice?
So when you look at the specialists and the people who are building your service desk, you've got to think about how do they come in and how do they make everything better. They're generally more seasoned people and they've put in the time to learning specific parts of the environment. But you've got to remember that underneath that, you've also got your initial people, your first level in the service desk. So the specialists have to understand that when they're working on the service desk, they're not just receiving tickets from that original tier. They have to think of it as, we need to think of this as a training opportunity. So when something gets escalated to us, they need to think about, is this an opportunity to train that first tier? Could we give them some training or some pointers so that the next time this ticket comes in, we can have that person step up and do the ticket themselves? In all effect, they're really training the next generation of 2 and 3 tier technicians. They're providing them opportunities for job growth in the long term, and it sets those existing technicians up to move up the ranks and focus on more, and gives the 2 and 3 technicians more of a chance to focus on more strategic projects and initiatives within the organization. And identifying these opportunities is really some of the basis of the shift left strategy that we're going to talk about a little bit later.
That sounds fantastic. And it sounds like it benefits not only the end users of the service desk, but of, IT staff themselves as they look to develop their career and, sharpen their proverbial saws. Scott, you mentioned the shift left strategy. Let's talk about that. What is the shift left strategy?
So the idea behind the shift left strategy is, if you think of everything as a line, and to the right of that line, you're going to have your tier 1 technicians, so the initial people on the service desk who receive your tickets and triage them, maybe do the simple tickets. Then you're going to have tier 1, 2, 3, all these different specialist groups. And as you move more to the right, things get more expensive. So not only are you going through tier 1 first, which takes some time, but generally those tier 2, 3, or whatever technicians, they're going to have a higher wage. So when a ticket comes in, the further it goes to the right, the more time it's going to take and the more costly it's going to be. So your goal as an IT department should be to try to shift everything you can left. You want to have it go closer to those technicians who are in front of the user so that their issue gets resolved quicker, and those more valuable resources or expensive resources are able to focus on more strategic things. The ultimate goal for shift left is to go beyond that line of the first tier technicians and move things into more of a self-service trajectory. So users are able to use self-service tools, things such as password resets or automations built in your ITSM system to do the work automatically. Not only is that going to reduce the cost of the service desk technician's time, but it's also going to make the request be serviced faster by the end user because their issue will be resolved quicker.
Right. I love that. And I think it's, I think there's, so much goodness in doing something like that. Let's talk for a minute about incident response, because in many ways, this is, the core of, how we evaluate our success as a service desk. What does that mean to you, and what's kind of our approach here?
So the approach at Infotech for incident response is to really build something that's standardized and consistent for all users. Once the incident or whatever is received by the technicians, there's a certain set of steps that need to be followed. So the tier one should be looking to see, can we resolve this ourselves? And they should have a checklist of things they do, whether it be personal knowledge, checking knowledge base. And then if they can't exhaust that, that's when they look into escalating to tier 1, 2, or 3. And having strict rules around how do you prioritize the tickets? What are your rules for escalation to make sure you don't go over your SLA? Those are very important, and having those structures will help give a consistent approach within the service desk.
Right. No, that makes complete sense to me. I appreciate you sharing that. Let's talk for a minute about communication. One of the insights we found here is that, we say communication is kind of half the battle for service desk. What does that mean, and what does that look like in practice from, an actioning standpoint?
So there's the basic things you have to think about with a ticket. You've got to follow up with the users, and you've got to make sure that you've got certain points and times. If you're getting close to when your SLA might go over, you want to make sure that the user is aware. You want to make sure that you've got that stream of information going back and forth consistently with the users. So when you're in the middle of an incident, you want to make sure that the communication is up and running and that it's flowing very naturally. Beyond that, though, outside of just doing tickets, the service desk is the face of the IT department. So you want to take opportunities where you can to get in front of the users beyond working on those tickets. You want to encourage the team to speak up at meetings, whether they be within IT or larger ones within the company's community. And you want to think about, are there different things you can use, like holding training sessions or lunch and learns, to help raise the profile of IT and get them seen as a partner. This goes back to that data strategy. If there's areas where you think staff could use a little bit of a refresher for training, feel free to say, have a drop-in where people can just come in on their lunch or drop in on a Zoom webinar, and IT will walk them through that and give some things that they can work on to help make their jobs easier. Not only does it benefit the user and reduce tickets, but it also raises the profile of IT and gets you more seen as a strategic partner and more of a better service provider within the organization.
Right. That makes sense. And again, it is exciting because it sounds like there's a whole pile of knock-on benefits to doing this properly. Scott, let's maybe zoom out for a minute and just, talk a little bit more abstractly about, what does a good or a great service desk look like? How can we, looking at an organization, get a feel for what this looks like versus a service desk that's, less functional?
Some of the things that I find are really helpful is to take advantage of automation. So find ways that you can make sure those tickets never actually get in front of a human being. There's lots of great things with ITSM systems where service delivery is completely automated. I have a couple of customers that I speak to, for instance, and I've got some where they go into the catalog, they find the software they're looking for, they click on the software, and automatically the software checks for the entitlements for that user. It then, if the entitlement is there, goes through and sets something up with orchestration software to automatically install the software package on that user's PC. This delivers the software within an hour or two, and there's never a human interaction. Everything is captured on the background. The licensing, it goes over automatically within your IT asset management solution. The user gets their software automatically, and then the IT team really doesn't have to do anything. And that's really embracing that shift left. Beyond that, there's also getting that information to find ways to improve everyone else's life within IT and the business as a whole. So make sure that you identify gaps within the business and use that information to come up with great ways that you can make things better. You don't have to make seismic shifts either. Just focus on some trends and look for training and problem management to help decrease your ticket load across the board. That'll help you take better use of the resources that you have and help smooth things out and provide a better service delivery overall. Another thing that I'm seeing some organizations do is integrations with other systems. So, for example, I talk to customers on a fairly regular basis who've integrated their HRIS, HR systems into their service desk. And now those systems are feeding and creating user accounts. So that's another example of shifting something beyond IT. HR doesn't have to wait for IT to create a ticket anymore. They can simply update their system and then everything syncs up and IT is then just able to monitor from a distance. So taking advantage of automation and really looking at that data and focusing on continuous improvement is going to make your service desk go from good to, fantastic.
So Scott, for a lot of organizations, I'm assuming that, they're not going to get from, firefighting mode to exceptional in one fell swoop. What's our journey or our roadmap that we recommend organizations take to get from the 101 and beyond? What does that look like?
Well, it really starts with building a solid foundation, and that's where standardized the service desk comes in. It makes sure that you're set up and able to scale from the most simple, smallest service desk up to the largest. You want to make sure that you're building all the different processes and standards that you can follow throughout your journey, and they can scale and grow with you as you go from a fairly rudimentary service desk to one that's taken full advantage of things like chatbots and automation.
Joining me on our panel today, we've got Senior Research Analyst Emily Sugarman and Principal Advisory Director Scott Houle. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks, Jeff.
Maybe we can start today with, one of the awkwarder or more juicy topics in Service Desk, which is to insource or to outsource. What are our recommendations here? Is there a right or wrong answer, and how should we approach this problem?
Well, when thinking about insourcing versus outsourcing, it really comes down to what is the use case and how are you structured. Thinking about it, depending on what applications you use, do you really need a Salesforce or an SAP specialist, or do you want to more focus on more generalists? So the first step I see here is usually identifying what are the core service functions that you want to put forward, and then focus on creating resources that can support those. And if that doesn't involve having specialized resources on particular applications, then you can look at outsourcing or support agreements with the vendors for some of those other places. The benefit, though, is down the road, if you do maintain some sort of generalist staff, you can train them on how to work with the third parties rather than focusing on knowing all the minutiae of these very specialized applications. So they can start to gather a little bit more business experience and, grow as employees and hopefully better managers once they start to increase in their career.
Emily, do you agree? Anything to add?
I think it's right. Wow, my first sentence and it's just a frog died in my throat. I think it's really important for people to keep in mind, do they have the vendor management skills that they will need in order to do that kind of outsourcing? Is the staff skilled in that vendor management piece, which will be essential to having that kind of successful relationship? And, you really need to also think about what this transition is going to look like, and spend a lot of time making sure your customers, your end users, are prepared for that. If it's going to be a good experience. So I think just really being honest and looking at your own organization and saying, are we ready? Do we know how we will transition our knowledge to the third-party partner? Is it documented? Have we gone back to, again, those really core foundational processes and made sure we understand what we will need from our partner before looking to make those changes?
That makes sense. And maybe along those lines, one of the hot topics of the day is all about AI agents right now, right? Especially around, sort of customer service. Do we see a timeline to actually replacing a service desk with AI agents, or is it more of an augmenting component there?
I find that it's more of an augment at this point in time. The AI agents are definitely something every service desk should be looking at. And it's going to replace some of the easy tickets, but they don't quite have the judgment yet to be able to fully replace a living, breathing person. I think they'll get there at some point for some tasks, but I think that most people who are, the initial people on the service desk, I think their jobs are secure for quite a while.
it's also worth remembering that for many staff, the service desk is sort of their entry point into a career in IT and with the organization. So, how are you going to kind of maintain that entry point for really valuable resources who will want to stay with the organization? If right now, sort of by default, it's sort of a place where people can sort of learn and grow their skills and then decide how to specialize. We want to make sure that people still have the opportunity to do that.
Yeah, exactly. And another analogy I like to think about is when you go to the grocery store today, there's the automated kiosks, but a lot of people still prefer the human touch of going to that person. So I don't think it's ever fully going away. I think the role is just going to be changing. And what the role does is going to evolve just as AI keeps evolving.
Right, that makes sense. Do you have any war stories of, members you've talked to who are in the process or have already implemented, AI into their service desk and what that journey is looking like?
From my perspective, I've got one who started using it. They feel like it's been trial by fire. They're getting used to using the AI. They're mostly using it today to identify knowledge base articles and write knowledge base articles. It's really something that augments what they do on their day-to-day job. They have struggled finding ways to get the proper insights from the AI. So while they're getting benefit from it and it's showing return on investment, it hasn't been something that's going to completely replace certain segments of the IT team. It's really just been an enabler for the service desk manager to free up more of his time and to free up some resource time from some administrative duties. Although I say this about everything when I talk about AI, we're at one point today, in 3 years, AI is probably going to look completely different. So as we look to the future, we've got to remain open to the possibilities of things changing. But I don't think it's ever going to completely replace certain roles.
In terms of structure of the service desk, there's anywhere from completely centralized to localized to anywhere in between. What do we recommend here? And, how do we answer that question?
Well, it comes down to really knowing your users and knowing what they need. And it's going to kind of depend on the way the organization is set up. So actually, I need to think about that for a bit more, because what I was thinking about was like, or Scott, when we talked about this before, for example, like healthcare, versus higher education, like that sort of like the industry or the sector influences that decision. But
I want to hear more about that, frankly.
So from my experience with localized resources or having things centralized, the basic thing that I think everyone understands is that centralization is going to give you greater control over what the service desk does and better views into how operations are running. However, that isn't always best. I talked about my background in healthcare when Emily and I were kind of discussing this. And with that, sometimes local resources are going to be better able to provide insight into particular challenges of that location. You will see things like a rural location might not be able to get printer toner in time, or one certain location might have a slower internet speed, so it's creating latency issues with logging into certain applications. And boots on the ground in those locations is going to help you understand their challenges better. So you can have those localized resources, but what's important is to make sure that there's really only one service desk and everything works together as a team. You want to have tickets coming in the same channels, and you want to make sure that they're all documented. You want to make sure that there's no slippage or loss. You want to understand everything, and you want to make sure there's everything accounted for, no duplicates. And then the service desk manager should work with that localized staff and listen to those challenges of each of those different sites and gain an understanding beyond what the data is telling them. So this is where it gets really important for a manager to start to listen and understand what those challenges are, and if they need to pivot your strategy for the service desk based on what you're seeing in that location.
One thing too that I think people should keep in mind is how that particular setup impacts their end user satisfaction data. So, if your organization is in the habit of running an end user satisfaction survey yearly, a relationship survey where you capture people's perception of the performance of IT, including the service desk, are people's responses differing or changing based on their location? This is actually something that you can get via the Infotech end user satisfaction diagnostic program. But if you look at people's feedback and their satisfaction scores broken down by location, are they giving you different kinds of feedback depending on the location? If you're capturing data properly, you should be able to tell that, or you can run the survey through Infotech.
I'm glad you said that, Emily, and that's something that I think is really important here. Is just we talk about service desk as being the face of IT, right? And it's my sense that for that face, users have a very different experience if there's someone walking the halls with them, or someone who they feel they can tap on the shoulder and ask for support, versus this kind of amorphous central body that may or may not help them, and they don't feel that they have good visibility into what's going on there. So I absolutely see the value in having more localized staff. Is that must do though, or are there ways to provide a strong relationship from a centralized location or office?
No, there's definitely ways to provide it centralized, and I think COVID proved that. I know in my experience, support operations went from hands-on in person to very quickly everything was done remotely or over Teams. It was just necessity. So I think the industry's shown that you can do a strong centralized service desk. But once again, it comes down to making sure that you've developed the right tools and processes to be able to support that. Just like with anything else, if you don't give the technicians the capability to be successful, they probably won't be. And you have to get yourself in the mindset of delivering good service when you don't have a person right beside you.
And just to build on that, one thing we really want to help people see is that good customer service doesn't equal, being able to tap someone on the shoulder as they're walking down the hall to do something else, or do what we call, the hallway tackle, pulling people aside. We really want there to be a set of very clear processes for the right way to submit your request or your ticket to the service desk, and then your users will trust that they will get the same high level of customer service that they would if they just directly contacted that person through, a channel-based collaboration tool or calling their direct line.
I used to have users that we used to joke they were burning holes in the carpet, running back and forth to the IT area, just because they're going so far up. But we had to explain to them that if they keep doing that, it's actually creating more work for us in the IT department because we're being interrupted. And now we have to stop what we're doing, talk to this person, write up a ticket, and then figure out the triage right then and there. And quite often the resource they would go speak to isn't the right one for what their problem was. So by bypassing triage, they were just throwing the whole process out of a loop. So we had to put up some barriers, and we had to build some structure directly into our process to make sure that, people were disincentivized from doing that. We'd still allow phone calls and we'd still allow the walk-ups in a case of emergency. But most of the time we would redirect them back to the proper intake channel because we couldn't allow people to jump the queue because that was not fair to the other users.
It's interesting you say that, Scott, and it's certainly been my experience that does happen if you let people do it. And what I've seen firsthand is the most notorious queue jumpers seem to be the people who are either executives or higher up in the organization, right? They expect kind of a special treatment there. How do you balance that, or is that just something you kind of have to hold your nose and deal with when you're in the service desk?
I think
Yeah.
that's a great
Go
debate.
ahead, Emily.
Oh, sorry. I was going to say,
No, go ahead,
actually,
Emily.
Jeff, that that's a really good debate topic that we could have included that you just sort of naturally introduced. So,
I say we included Emily. I think that's a good one.
absolutely. So
I want to hear your opinions.
I was going to say the debate of whether to have a formal, VIP process for the taking in tickets from VIP users, including that in the prioritization scheme, allowing that to impact the impact and urgency of their tickets, that is often an ongoing debate. Should we do this or not? Should we have sort of formal VIP process that people go back and forth on? And I think that, for many organizations, this is just what's realistic, and that's the reality. There will be some VIP users, and what then becomes important is to make sure that this is something that's documented and understood about how a VIP user will impact the prioritization step. Sometimes people aren't comfortable with the language of VIP user. So then perhaps people could have a conversation around, okay, well, how are we really defining VIP user? Is it someone whose activities actually have a very high impact to the organization because of the nature of the work they do? Maybe it's public facing, for example. Maybe it affects the organization's reputation. So that might be another way to think about it when you're trying to define, well, what do we really mean by VIP user? We don't mean that some users are more important than others because we care about the customer service for all of our users. We're really thinking about the person in that role. What kind of impact do they have? Are they having a high impact that therefore means we have to increase the priority level of their ticket?
Right. So it's what I hear you saying, Emily, is that it's okay to break the process, but we should still have a process for breaking the process. Is that fair?
Yeah, we should. If we're going to prioritize VIP users, let's at least be upfront about it and build it into the process so that it's happening in a way that's standard and accepted.
In my world, Emily, we used to have a list of VIP users. In fact, if their tickets came in, there would be a little VIP button beside them. And we knew that they would get first attempt at least communication. So we would break the process for them because at the end of the day, these were usually the people who signed our paychecks, and we wanted to make sure that they were happy with us and the service we delivered. But just because we had them as VIP users doesn't mean we always dropped everything for them. We still put them through a triage process. What would generally happen, though, is if there wasn't anything that seemed like it was more critical, like if we didn't have a Seb 1 incident going on, we would take care of what the VIP user had and then go back to our regular scheduled ticket activities. And if there was something impactful going on, we would communicate with the user. We'd let them know what was going on. We'd give them a little bit of extra care that we wouldn't normally do. And we would say, give them a time frame for when we're going to get in touch with them to help resolve their issue. Or we'd schedule a time to meet with them to work through it, depending on what it is. So we follow this to a certain degree. In fact, we had an interview question when we were going for new techs, and I'd ask them, I'd say, it's Friday afternoon, 3 tickets come in at the same time. One is about a production floor issue and the inability to ship out product. The other one is the CEO is having an issue with his phone. And the other one is HR is having a problem getting something set up for a user starting the following week. And I would have my techs work through the knowledge-based process. Like, I'd want to understand their thought process for how do they prioritize these. The best ones to me would always say, get that issue with the production and with product going out of the warehouse done first. But before you do that, follow up with the CEO, let them know the situation, and then schedule a time to work with them when you feel that this issue would be resolved. So that way, you can understand that they still know to provide that good customer service, but still prioritize what are the overall essential needs of the organization, rather than just jumping and helping the VIP user out. If your people are always getting bothered and you don't have a large team, sometimes you do just have to shut the door and say, we'll get to you when we get to you. Please submit a ticket through the proper channel. A lot of organizations feel that's bad customer service, but at the end of the day, it helps provide a more structured approach, which should give you a better result at the end.
And yeah, customer service doesn't always mean going above and beyond for the customer. It's really about establishing that set of things that you have to do and then just executing them really well and consistently each time. You could go above and beyond for one person and spend a lot of extra time with them, but then what happens to those other 3 or 4 people who are waiting? So it's really about setting the expectations with the users and then living up to those expectations to your end of the agreement.
Yeah, and just jumping on that, Emily, a tough thing that you'll find is people will find their favorite tech. and you'll get people will keep calling that tech. And I've had to have some frank discussions with my techs over the years saying, it's great that you're doing this and it's great that you think this is helping. You're definitely building an internal brand. However, this isn't what you're supposed to be doing. And this is taking you off of the work that could help develop you and help establish your career better. So I always say, if you want to stay on service desk the rest of your career, absolutely keep doing that. You're going to be everyone's first favorite that they go to, and you're going to have all these tickets that we miss and we don't get a full picture of the view of what's going on in the department. But if you want to grow, you've got to start saying that this, needs to go in the front door. We need to go to the tier 1 techs before they go to tier 2, because that's their job and we need to grow those people. So it can be tough sometimes having those interpersonal conversations with a tech just to try to get them to think about the larger picture. And people are good. Like, people want to help. Like, you want to feel helpful. You want to feel like you're helping people. It gives you that endorphin rush when you do good. But it's not always what's best for the organization as a whole.
Right. It's the classic issue of heroes often stand in the way of a good repeatable process.
Exactly. And then if those people take all that organizational knowledge with them when they do end up moving on, then you're missing a big chunk of information that never made it into the service desk because they did it off the side of their desk or over the phone.
I wanted to ask about metrics related to the service desk. Are there standard metrics we recommend that are the right metrics for service desk? And if so, what are they?
I think it's really tempting to want to know what other organizations are doing, of course, when it comes to metrics. And then, of course, there's always going to be, some of those key metrics like first contact resolution or average time to resolve the incident or fulfill the service request, or ticket volume, or CSAT, customer satisfaction. But I think before jumping to the idea of metrics and external benchmarks, it's important to go back and define your own goals first. Back to that idea, what do we want our service desk to look like? What do we care about? What are we tracking? We should really only be tracking the things we care about reporting on. So it really does come back to the business goals, the organizational goals, and IT goals. And that's really a good place to start.
I would jump in on that, Emily, too, as also think about for customer satisfaction, for example. You've got a couple of different kinds of surveys. You've got yearly customer satisfaction surveys. You've got the ones per ticket. And then you've also got things such as, first call resolution. Those all play a part into customer satisfaction. So think about what your KPIs are and think about from multiple dimensions to get a better understanding. Don't look at it from a keyhole. Think about it as more of the wider environment. And I always found it's very important to have a good base of metrics, because if you just focus on certain things, you might miss some things that might be game changers. You might miss some insights that might not be as relevant. I used to look up things like time when tickets come in, time when my techs resolve most of the issues when they get closed. And that would help me gain some insights onto the demographics of my users and where they were. And having things like, we're having the quantities of tickets by location or by application or by department. This is all good information that you can use to gather some insights that might not be clear if you focus on a couple things, but if you cast a wider net, you can sometimes find some things that you might not have thought you were looking for.
It's also important to avoid unintentionally incentivizing one metric too much at the expense of others. So I know, thinking, for example, of first contact resolution or first call resolution, of course, having a good performance on that metric is great. However, if we promote the idea of achieving that metric too much, we don't want to accidentally incentivize staff to prematurely close tickets. So you want to be able to track a few things to make sure that's not happening. You want to make sure, for example, if your FCR is going up, are the number of tickets reopened also going up? So that would be a bad sign. Is the end user satisfaction going up? We want to make sure it's not going down. So thinking about them holistically is important.
Yeah, the tension metrics. And I used to have techs try to game the system like that as well. They would try to focus on one, but they would ignore the other parts of the metrics. and it's something we'd often have to address. It can be very good too, is when you start to get a good base of information, like a good year or so of knowledge, you can start to calculate things like standard deviation and find the outliers. And then you can address those and just be comfortable with everything that's within that standard so that you're not, you can understand when people are performing as they should. And you can also identify if they're taking too long or if they're able to find ways to go faster. Usually, if you can find people who can do the job faster, there's usually some basis for innovation in there. And you usually want to talk to those employees and say, how are you able to still maintain your quality while getting this done quicker? So those are some of the good kinds of insights that you can find when you really comb through the data.
Emily, Scott, thanks so much for joining. This has been really insightful.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff. Pleasure to be here.
Let's dive into the standardized the service desk methodology. Can you walk me through what this methodology looks like? What are the phases and what's the approach here?
Yeah, so like with a lot of things, we start by identifying your current state and writing down some of the goals that you're looking to achieve as part of your service desk. That's really the foundation, is to understand where you are and where you want to go. From there, we want to talk about defining your service desk structure overall. This talks through everyone's roles and responsibilities, and it talks about how do you want to receive tickets, and when you receive them, where do you send them to? What does ticket intake and triage look like? The next step is to ensure that you're capturing and reporting on the right data, making sure that you can use that ticket data so you can drive improvements all throughout the organization. And it's also important to address what you can do to improve the incident resolution and service request fulfillment processes. A lot of this is going to go hand in hand with enabling shift left, and it really starts with building out a good knowledge base and starting to provide those different automations and self-service options. The last thing you want to do is implement a vision for the service desk for the future. You want to understand how to properly communicate that vision within the organization and help the company and your team work through the different changes that are going to be caused by this.
So Scott, with that in mind, what are some of the deliverables or some of the artifacts that organizations, walk away with going through this process?
So the key deliverable that you're going to see out of Standardize the Service Desk is the standard operating procedure. And this establishes clear guidelines and procedures in matters related to service desk operations. In my old world, the standard operating procedure for the service desk was critical. I used it as a starting point for my team. On day one, I handed them the document and told them to read it. It was their first 2 hours because I wanted them to understand what the expectation was of them. And once they were comfortable with it, I also gave them a 2-pager, which they would keep on their desk. And it was there just so that they could always see, how do we prioritize tickets? What does escalation look like? So that they could see that and provide a consistent experience across all of the different requests they were working on. So it really starts with having those operating procedures defined and standardized and something that they can use moving forward in all facets of their job.
That's awesome, and it makes complete sense to me. What does a good standard operating procedure look like in the world of service desk?
A good standard operating procedure is going to very definitively outline what is the purpose of the service desk, define the roles and responsibilities, talk through how you prioritize and how you escalate tickets, and then it's going to walk through your different incident and service response procedures. So you want to have it as a reference guide so that people can go in there and understand this is how we follow a good ticket process. And to complement that, you also want to create a quality process where someone is reviewing the tickets within the service desk to make sure that the technicians are following those standard operating procedures to the letter. And then taking that information and meet with the techs to make sure that you can correct where they're not necessarily following things completely. It goes back to garbage in, garbage out. If you don't have good data within the service desk, you're not going to be able to trust or use the data effectively. So having the standard operating procedure and a quality process is going to get you that.
So how long does it take, organizations to get there, to actually get that standard operating procedure built? And how much can be done in one concentrated week of effort?
You can get through a lot in a week of a workshop. You can come up with what your target state is. You can come up with some base standard operating procedures, and you can develop the plan to get there. there's always going to be things that are going to come into the environment and cause some problems there. So, for example, quite often when you go through a workshop, you're going to come up with great ideas about how you want to structure things. And then you have to go into your ITSM and ticketing system and then make them happen. That doesn't always happen overnight, and is definitely not happening within 4 days of a workshop. But one of the best deliverables coming out of a workshop is that roadmap, where you can define these activities and track down what are these changes you want to make. So you can define what your SOPs and processes are, and then you can develop a roadmap within that 4 days, and you can use that to get from point A to point B within your service desk.
What's keeping IT leaders up at night around the service desk that's creating them pain? And what's the risk there?
Well, what's literally keeping a lot of service desk operators up at night is security incident response. I know from my experience that never takes a downtime. So I've had many nights where I'm working from my home office at midnight trying to coordinate a response. But from another perspective, from more of the standardize of the service desk, it's really about making sure that you can keep your head above water and you don't get overwhelmed with tickets. That's one thing that a lot of teams I find struggle with. It is making sure that you're able to get yourself out of that more reactive mode and get into more of an optimized position. And that's really where standardizing the service desk comes into play. When you've got a set path to follow, it makes it easier to do that. Beyond all of that, when you can deliver consistent responses, you're really improving your customer service. So when you can deliver the same thing with the same amount of dedication and enthusiasm to all of your customers, it's going to show with an improved customer satisfaction score. And if you're unable to deliver things consistently, that's going to start to show, and that's going to rise all the way up to the CIO, and you're going to have a problem where there would be this perception that the IT team isn't as effective. Even if you are very effective and able to do your job, you've always got to remember, perception is reality, so you really want to make sure that you're always putting your best foot forward.
Scott, thanks so much for joining us today. I really appreciate your insights.
No, thanks, Jeff. It was my pleasure.
And for anyone who's interested in learning more about standardizing the service desk, check out the full blueprint at infotech.com.